jump ahead because this is where the two of us get connected. The sisters also, for many years after the Second Vatican Council, operated a center in Rome that was called CIDIC, which was the International Jewish Christian Documentation Service. It was entrusted to them by the Vatican to be a hub for Christians learning about Judaism as that relationship was just beginning to grow in the 1960s, and as to be a place where the best of Jewish Christian thinking would be brought together and shared with people. And I was a student in Rome. I did graduate studies there from 1998 to 2002. And in my first year, I was doing courses in Jewish biblical interpretation and the Jewish background of Christianity and Jesus. And I was doing really well in the courses. And my professor said to me, "You really seem to like this stuff." And I said, "I think it's amazing. I've never been exposed to it before." He said, "There's someone you've got to meet." So he took me out and walked me about a block around the corner, took me up and rang the doorbell. And this was CIDIC. And darned if the two women who were running it were not two Sisters of Sion from Saskatchewan, Sister Lucy and Sister Margie McGrath. So I became a volunteer there, and I was able to sit in on a lot of sessions, go on some of their tours, benefit from their library. And that was the beginning of a friendship that's lasted now for more than 20 years. The Sisters of Sion have been wonderful mentors to me because they have that 150, 160 years of prayerful relationship with the Jewish community. And they are in the Catholic world really mentors to a lot of us. They have been very involved in leading that conversation forward in terms of the relationship between Judaism and the Catholic Church. So I owe them a lot, and I owe Sister Lucy a lot.
Thank you, Murray. It's mutual. And I would just, before Rabbi David, before you come in, I would just like to affirm and jump off what Murray said in recalling that our congregation, the Sisters of Our Lady of Sion, Roman Catholic community, we are now in 22 countries. And as I said earlier, we began particularly with schools. And it's interesting because we had schools in both in Christian countries such as England, Ireland, and we also had schools in Muslim countries from the beginning, in Turkey, in Egypt. And as Murray said, we went to Jerusalem already in 1856. And we only came to Canada in 1905. But we have a long presence in many other countries.
So what would you say that the Sisters of Zion, their purpose and their activities are at this point in time?
Well, again, I can begin, and I would mention three aspects, Rabbi. Our, as we call it, our charism, or our mission, or our vision as Sisters of Sion is important in the church at this moment in a very significant way, I feel, because first of all, we want to help the church to remember and to reflect on our origin within Judaism, both in the Hebrew scriptures, and Jesus, Mary, the first apostles were all Jewish. We share this common root with our Jewish brothers and sisters. And secondly, as I mentioned, we want to help the church, whether it's working with seminarians or teachers, educators, or other persons, to rediscover the roots of our Christian faith within Judaism. And thirdly, I want to mention that it's particularly since the tragedy of the Holocaust or the Shoah that we as Sisters of Sion felt very much called and reminded to work to counter all forms of racism or anti-Semitism, and to try to work with the Jewish community in doing this.
And if I can kind of build on what Sister Lucy was saying, the three thrusts of the work of the Sisters of Sion are a commitment to the church and to the Christian community, a commitment to helping Christians rediscover God's faithful love for the Jewish people, and working for a world of justice and peace. And so in different parts of the world, that those proportions are somewhat different. But those are the three thrusts of the vision of the Sisters of Sion, and they all build upon and influence one another. What does that look like concretely? In many parts of the world, the Sisters of Sion are known as biblical scholars. Many of their sisters have done advanced degrees and years of study in Scripture, but specifically in the Jewish reading of Scripture. Many of them have done extensive work in rabbinic interpretation, and they're very familiar with the traditions of Midrash and the Talmuds. And they share that with Christians who probably would never discover those texts otherwise, which of course opens Christians' minds to different ways of thinking about the Bible. So they're really well known for encouraging Christians to delve into Jewish ways of reading the Bible. But they're also a catalyst in a lot of places because they're very much about relationships. They everywhere that they go, they're building bridges of friendship, usually with the leaders of local Jewish communities. Many countries have national or regional councils of Christians and Jews, and the Sisters of Sion are in the thick of that work wherever they are around the world. And in education, whether that education is happening, some of the sisters are teaching at universities and colleges, some of them do teaching at parishes, some of them are involved in elementary and secondary education. So at all the different levels of education, they try to bring that message of respect and esteem for the Jewish people, and not just the Jewish people of the past, but Judaism as it is lived today with all its rich history and heritage.
Why do you think that this is so important at this time? And why is this such a mission that calls you and the Sisters of Zion at this moment in time?
Lucy?
Well, I think it's very important for a couple of reasons. And one is that, as Murray mentioned, in the Catholic Church, since the Second Vatican Council, which was from 1962 to 65, there has been a new understanding in the Church of our relationship with the Jewish people. And yet this has not trickled down, this new understanding, to the grassroots level, to the level of the parishes, to the level of seminarians, etc. And so there's really a lot of, well, I would say education to do in that area today. And it's also important too, because we have created centers of Jewish Christian studies and relations. And I see that we have with us here one of our sisters from Costa Rica, Sister Margarita, or Ana Murillo, who is part of one of our Jewish Christian centers in San Jose in Costa Rica. And so it's ongoing, the need for education. That is why, too, our Sisters of Sion are very involved in different organizations that help to better understand and to appreciate Judaism and Jewish Christian relations, such as the International Council of Christians and Jews, of which Murray has been a part for a number of years.
And if I could just build on, piggyback on that, I think there's a couple of reasons in this particular time why dialogue generally and Jewish Christian dialogue in particular is vital. I think many of you would agree that certainly in the last generation, North America and the West has become very, very polarized in terms of our rhetoric. We see it in politics. We see that, left and right-wing political parties really can't speak to one another. There's hostility. There's a polarization and a tension that makes it very difficult to talk about anything in common. So I think, we live at a time when there's a crying need for dialogue and for people who have learned the skills of dialogue that can share those with other people. And the Sisters of Sion have been doing this for 150 years, religiously, culturally. How do we enter into the world of the other in a way that is respectful? How do we go and listen and allow the other to tell us who they are without a lot of preconceived notions? But I also think right now, kind of in hand with that, there's been an alarming rise, certainly in the last 5 years, but longer than that, in both right-wing and left-wing anti-Semitism in many parts of the world, in some really scary ways. The rise of neo-Nazism, the right-wing, some really right-wing, far-right movements that are openly anti-Semitic. In some parts of the United States, there's a rising again of the Ku Klux Klan that most of us thought had died out 50 years ago. But also hand in hand with that, there is a forgetting about the lived experience of the Holocaust and the Shoah. We are in an age, and all of you know this better than I do, that many of the eyewitnesses and the survivors of the Holocaust are going to be gone in the next 10 or 15 years. There will be no living memory of the Holocaust. There'll be lots of documents, there'll be lots of photographs, there's Yad Vashem and all kinds of study centers, but there won't be the living people who can say, I saw it with my own eyes, I was there. And that frightens me. I come from St. John's, Newfoundland, and a lot of Jewish refugees who were escaping Hitler and the Nazis arrived in St. John's and got off the boat and stayed there. My family had a lot of Jewish colleagues and friends when my mother was growing up. And she knew that history very, very well because she had heard it from the people who were there. I fear that as those living witnesses die, there seems to be a growing resistance to remembering and honoring the Holocaust, and there's a rise of Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism that I think is really scary, considering that we are still within living memory of the Second World War. And I think it's important that all of us who are not Jews be allies of the Jewish community in making sure that memory not be forgotten, ever.
So what you're telling us is that this idea of relationships and dialogue is really not a luxury, but it's very much of a necessity, what you're suggesting.
Yes. Well, you think we live in such an interconnected world, and tonight is a prime example of that. We've got people here from several different countries. Our world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and yet we haven't necessarily been given the dialogue to make those kinds of encounters fruitful with other cultures and other ways of thinking, other worldviews. So I think as the world gets smaller and as we're able to use this technology well, skills for dialogue become more essential than ever. Lucy?
Yes, and I believe that in our own context here in Toronto or wherever we find ourselves, it's very important to dialogue in the sense of to be willing to listen to and to learn from the other. We are living in what we might call a multicultural or pluralistic world, and that is around us all the time. And I think that to have some of the interest and the skills to be willing to listen attentively, carefully to the other, and to learn from them and to see in what ways it challenges us in our own life and in our own faith commitments is very important. And hopefully it leads us also dialogue to work together for significant social justice issues today.
I don't think I have to tell any of the people from out of Israel, but also certainly Sister Lucy is a dear friend of Rabbi Schuler, and what he did as someone who witnessed personally Kristallnacht and who came here and was imprisoned because he was coming from Germany and what he had been suspected of what he did in spite of what many people think would have never have entered his mind, but he made one of his important life's mission is to do interfaith dialogue. And I don't have to tell you all of his work going back to Germany for so many years to talk about his experience and about the Holocaust. And here in Toronto as well, he was one of the people who helped to found the Christian-Jewish Dialogue of Toronto, because he believed that it was, as both Murray and Sister Lucy were saying, that it was so important. And this was 50 years ago when he began it. And as Murray and Sister Lucy, you were saying, that even now it's that much more important for us.
Well, and I also,
As you mentioned, Rabbi Shield, I would just like to recall a wonderful experience we had recently, which many of you would know about and probably were present for, which was the celebration of Rabbi Shield's 100th birthday. I can see many of you nodding that you were probably present, as I was privileged with a couple of our Sisters of Sion to be there at Adath Israel Synagogue and to join with many, many people in celebrating and giving thanks for the life and the contributions of Rabbi Shield was a wonderful privilege and gift. I just want to mention that. And again, I want to thank you, Rabbi Seed, for organizing that.
Right. It was, the weather couldn't have been perfect as we drove by his house and waved. So it also, as you said, Sister Lucy, was an example of the importance of dialogue and coming together. What do you think, we've talked about the way things are now and the hopes that we have for dialogue, but do you have any sense of it looking forward, given the reality in which we're now living, in terms of the possibility of increased dialogue or how it might look moving forward?
well, if I can pick up on what we're doing here tonight, I think that tonight, the theme that you had tonight was the future of dialogue beyond the screen. But I think the screen, I think we've discovered in the last 4 months, is an increasingly powerful tool if we use it well to do this kind of work. It allows people to take part in these dialogues who might not have been able to take part in them before for all kinds of reasons. It allows us to connect with different parts of the world. If we set the time up properly, we can connect between Toronto and Israel very, very easily. We can have experts from there speaking with us about their experience. We can share our experience here. We're trying to do some of that work right now with the Christian-Jewish Dialogue of Toronto. But I think it also invites younger people in. Technology is like a second language for a younger generation. They've grown up with all of this video technology in a way that many of us have not. And so if we make good use of this technology, I think it invites a younger generation. It makes it relevant to them. It speaks a language that they're familiar with, and it allows them to share their experience and their vision and their hopes, which is going to be really important, because it's important that there be torchbearers to continue this work going forward.
And I would just affirm what you said, Murray, and give a couple of examples where I'm very hopeful of how new and creative developments can take place through our use of technology and social media. I know, of course, there's a limitation, because I think the most important way is by personal contact and face-to-face encounters. But I want to give just a couple of examples where we have been involved as Sisters of Sion. We have what we call itinerant ministries, or short-term programs that we offer. And I want to mention a couple that we offer in Harare, Zimbabwe, with the seminarians there. We have sisters from New York or Australia or other parts of the congregation who are formed in biblical studies or Jewish-Christian relations, and they can offer online courses that it would otherwise not be possible for us to go there. And it has been the same in the past year. We've been able to offer some online courses in Kenya and also in Malta. So even though COVID has limited us from moving around very much, as you know, I think technology has enabled us to continue to dialogue and to continue to be present in very creative ways.
And Rabbi Seed and I were discussing just before we came online that here in Canada, there are people who are uncomfortable going out to sessions at night, who simply won't, if there's a special event, won't go out after dark. especially in the winter, the weather can be a terrible obstacle to getting people together. And so, but if we can do this from our own living rooms, from our kitchens, from our dining rooms, it means that more people can take part. People who might not or wouldn't ordinarily have been able to come out for some of these events, we can bring it to them in their homes. And I think that expands the circle of the dialogue and allows it to touch more people and influence them in a positive way.
Let me just share, don't mind me going back just for a moment, share my screen. Sister Lucy, if you want to just tell where you are and where this is.
Yes, I was in Zimbabwe, in Harare, in a seminary, and on the left of the screen is the rector of the seminary, and on the right is the dean. And that was a few years ago, as you can see. That was in 2013. I went to Harare with another sister from London, England, and we set up teaching sessions, and we still have Sisters of Sion and some of our lay associates like Murray Watson going to teach in different places. And now we go every year to Harare, and this year together with a rabbi from New York, some of whom you will know, Rabbi David Sanmil, one of our Sisters of Sion from New York, is going with him to the Catholic University of Zimbabwe to offer a course. So it was like there are many new doors that have opened up. And the students, many of them have never seen or encountered a Jewish person, ever. And so one of the opportunities we had working with the rector and the dean was to encounter the Black Jewish community in Harare, Zimbabwe, and to put them in contact. And so now there is a growing relationship between the Black Jewish community in Harare and the Catholic seminary in Harare. It was a privilege for us, and it is an ongoing one to have that opportunity.
You've done some very, very creative and interesting things, throughout your careers. But what has it done for both of you personally? You've devoted so much of your life, practically, the lion's share of your life, to interfaith dialogue, particularly between Christians and Jews. What has it done for you personally that you might be able to share?
Well, certainly in my life, it has stretched me in beautiful, beautiful ways. I grew up in a small farming town in southern Ontario on Lake Huron. There were 3 Jewish families in the area, and they were all friends. But out of that friendship, I learned a lot. And then when the opportunity came to study, when I was doing my biblical studies, to be able to study Hebrew and be able to study Jewish biblical commentaries, I'd never been exposed to that in my theological training. There was a whole world there that I didn't know that enriched my reading of the Bible in all kinds of wonderful ways. And then the opportunity to live and study and teach in Israel and Jerusalem for a Christian, of course, brings my faith to life and 3-dimensionality in some wonderful, wonderful ways. But also to see, for the first time, to be a minority, a religious minority in another country, to be a Christian in Israel, opened my eyes to the experience of what it must be like for religious minorities in other countries. It sensitized me. But it's also enabled me to meet amazing scholars. It's doubled the size of my library with all kinds of amazing books that have taught me about Judaism and the Jewish-Christian relationship. There are books like this today. I don't know whether you can see this, but this is the Jewish Annotated New Testament that came out about 8 or 9 years ago. That would have been unthinkable 30 years ago. But there's an explosion of work, scholarly work and popular work, exploring the Jewish-Christian relationship and exploring how we understand the Bible similarly and differently. And for me as a biblical scholar, that has been an incredible richness, plus all of the friends that I've made in the course of that journey, who have enriched me just on a human level.
Well, I can almost say you've said what I would say, Murray, but I would add that I think one of the greatest experiences I had was when I studied for 5 years with Jewish professors at the Hebrew University. I did learn Hebrew, but thank goodness I was able to write my exams in English. But it was a wonderful privilege to be able to study with them the biblical texts, or to be able to study with them the understanding of Judaism and Jewish history from their point of view, not how we see it. And I think that was one of the deepest experiences for me. And I too, like Murray, had the opportunity living in Jerusalem. I was at that time coordinator of our sisters in the Middle East, and that involved working with our sisters in 7 different countries around Israel. And that truly stretched me also, and opened up an understanding and appreciation of the differences of others. We had sisters in Tunis, in Turkey, in Algeria, in Lebanon, and Egypt, and to go and to be present with them, and to, again, listen to them and to learn from them, I think was a wonderful growing experience for me as a person, because I came originally from Saskatoon and I hardly knew where Israel was on the map.
If I could just for a second, I'd just like to signal someone who's with us this evening. Dr. Eileen Schuler is with us, and some of you may know her name, but for those of you who don't, Eileen is one of the top Dead Sea Scrolls scholars in the world. She's one of the editors of the Dead Sea Scrolls in terms of publishing them. She's also a good friend to many of us here. But the Dead Sea Scrolls and the last 70 years of work that's been done by Jews and Christians, the Dead Sea Scrolls has been a remarkable area that has brought Jews and Christians together around the world to explore what we have in common, and the foundations, a period that was foundational for both of our religious traditions. That period of about 200 BCE to 100, 135 CE was formational for both of our communities. And so today we have scholars. Eileen is a professor at McMaster University in Hamilton, but she has dedicated her scholarly life to that, and she spends a good chunk of every year in Israel working with her colleagues and her friends there, helping us to unpack and unravel the mysteries of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So from my perspective, she's somebody who embodies beautifully the kind of things we're talking about tonight. So I'd just like to signal her in a particular way.
If I can also mention an aside, I also know Dr. Schuler. Some of you here may not know that Eileen Schuler was a professor and a good friend of our late member, Susan Haber. They worked so closely together, and it was a very special relationship that Eileen, Dr. Schuler had with Susan Haber. So that's something that connected me to Eileen many years ago. Why don't I imagine that and hope that some people here might have some questions of perhaps Sister Lucy and Murray about the topic and what we spoke about. I'm going to unmute everybody. If you raise your hand or just make some kind of wild gesticulations and talk, then perhaps we can continue the dialogue just a little bit more with you and our guests for tonight. Yes, Esty.
Hi, can you hear me?
Just talk a little bit loud.
Okay, hi.
Very good.
I have a question for Sister Lucy. I had the honor, by the way, of meeting you a couple of years ago when Rabbi Seed brought you to the Out of Israel for a seminar that you were conducting, and it was a wonderful time, and I'm really happy to see you again. I just wonder, you talk about this worldwide presence that the Sisters of Sion have, and I was wondering if there was ever a time where you experienced or the sisters experienced it, since they've been in existence for over 150 years, where you were rejected from a country. And was there anything that anyone could do to change that, or was that the end of it?
I don't recall in our history that we were rejected from any country. It wasn't always easy in some countries because sometimes our charism or our vision, as we might call it, was not understood. And some of the first places that we went to were Muslim countries, such as Tunis, Algeria, Turkey. And sometimes there were difficulties in that, as I said, although we were involved mainly in those countries, we were involved in schools. We had schools, what we called French finishing schools for high school girls. Yes, there were sometimes questions about why were we there, or also sometimes we had questions from some members of the Jewish communities in the countries in which we were. Are we there in order to convert you? I mean, that has been, you know, a very real experience. Or, well, you can imagine in the 19th century, the thinking at that time within the church was a conversion of the Jews. That's the theology, was that at the time. But we never, as Sisters of Sion, we never were engaged in what I would say conversion or proselytizing, which is the more suitable word, of trying to convince others to become Christians. We were not involved in that. And that was because of the vision that our founder had. But yes, sometimes there would be question as to it, because we were working so closely often with the Jewish community, what was our motivation? And that was sometimes misunderstood.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Carol.
Mute there. Hi. Question for you. Have you ever connected with other groups that are doing something similar or even broadly similar? And have you tried to and been rejected, or are other groups also willing to work with you, even though their vision may not be totally what yours is, but that there's some commonality?
Very good question. Yes, I'll begin and you continue, Murray. I think one example where we've had in the last, I would say 20 or 30 years is working together with what we call lay organizations. You know, in other words, they're not consecrated religious women as we are, but they would be communities of men and women. And in Jerusalem, for example, we have been working with a group which is called the Le Chemin Neuf from France. It's called the New Way. They're a group of lay men and women who are now working very closely with us in our ministry and our work in Jerusalem. And yes, we also have been working with different groups of with an ecumenical background, in that we were always a part of the ecumenical theological group in Jerusalem and worked very closely with them, and also with members of the Jewish community in the organization, which was called the Rainbow Group. It reflects the diversity of Christians and Jews in Jerusalem, and we worked very closely together with them.
Thank you.
And on a North American and a more global level, the sisters are very involved in the work of the International Council of Christians and Jews. There's always a delegation, a large delegation of sisters and their friends who attend the annual conferences of the ICCJ wherever they are. Very often the sisters are presenting workshops and papers at some of those. Here in North America, there's a group that's called the Council of Centers on Jewish-Christian Dialogue. There are somewhere between 20 and 30 university centers that are focused on that. And the sisters are affiliate members of that council and attend all of its functions. So they're involved in that network all across North America. And of course, because they're in all these different countries, they're also involved in a lot of grassroots work that's going on, not only in interfaith work, but also social justice, because the sisters, many of the sisters are very, very involved in the work of social justice, working with indigenous peoples, working for local people's rights. So they're very involved in ecumenical groups around social justice as well.
I would think that the more groups involved, the more countries involved, the better it is all around, that, the message can be, out there, and then each of the groups and each of the people will become better known as they go beyond their own group.
Yes.
There's a lot of cross-pollination that takes place.
Yeah.
And Carol, that's one of the riches of the Christian Jewish dialogue in Toronto too. There's a great diversity of Jewish representatives from different communities or organizations, and a great diversity of Christian members that are there too from different churches. So that is, I think, a way of working together with what we have in common and with our differences. And like you said, I think it's a richness for all of us.
With Rabbi Seed, many of us have been involved in a number of the programs that he has initiated, and we've had the privilege of having people to our synagogue to explain some of our tradition, and we've gone to other places. And a couple years ago, when there was stuff going on against some of the synagogues and some of the mosques and that, our various communities went to support the other and to form rings around their religious institutions, showing that togetherness and that caring. So that's been wonderful, and I certainly thank Rabbi Seed for, Rabbi Shield first, and then Rabbi Seed for continuing it in a wonderful way.
I think one of the challenges, Sister and Lucy and Murray were talking about what the Christian community is doing, especially through the Sisters of Zion. It's also a challenge for us as Jews to be willing to be open and to listen to others who are coming to take our hand in friendship. I understand, believe me, I'm a student of Jewish history as well, and I know the attempts that were made throughout history to convert us, and the attempts within Catholicism to do that, fortunately, which have now been rejected solidly by Christianity and by the Catholic Church. But still, there's this legacy of apprehension that so many Jews have to reaching out. And I think that's the challenge that we face as Jews.
If I can just piggyback on that for a second, Rabbi Seed, it reminds me of when I came back from Rome. I was all excited with interfaith dialogue, and so I started phoning synagogues in London and asking for appointments with the rabbis. And I called the rabbi at the conservative Schuler in London, and I said, my name is Murray Watson. I'm wondering, would I be able to come over and have coffee with you? And he said, well, what do you really want? And I said, have coffee. He said, no, no, no. He said, Christians don't just call me up because they want to have coffee with me. He said, they call me up because they want to come and convince me to believe in Jesus and become a Christian, and there I'll be saved. Is that what this is about? I said, no, I just wanted to have coffee. So we had coffee, and after about 6 months of having coffee, he said to me, you really did just want to have coffee? And I said, yes. And he said, well, that's just so delightful. He said, that hasn't been my experience. That hasn't been the experience of a lot of my predecessors. So he said, I'm glad to know that the day has come that he said, as a rabbi and as a Catholic, we can just get together and have coffee. And I said, well, that's a good sign of things to come.
And I think that's, again, the challenge for us is to be open to those opportunities, because we grow. I mean, I can tell you certainly that I've grown personally through my relationship with Sister Lucy, with Murray, with Dr. Schuler for many years. And it has enriched my life so much, and other people who are not Jewish. It's enriched my life, and made a greater understanding for me in terms of my Judaism by looking at it through the eyes of others and being able to share. I think when we're open, we learn so much about not only the other, but about ourselves as well. Yes. You have to unmute yourself.
No. Nancy, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
There we go. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Murray.
Hi, Nancy. How are you? Good to see you.
Well, thanks. I'm an Anglican, and I'm a graduate of Huron University College, the Anglican seminary there, and about 20 years ago. And I don't recall my course calendar, my course of study all that well. I know we had biblical studies in the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures, but I don't remember seeing anything that would address interfaith relationships. And I just wondered if in the intervening 25 years or so, there's been any progress in that you can see, Murray or Sister Lucy, because I think that kind of thing being studied by seminarians of whatever denomination is really critical.
Absolutely. Well, I can speak from the two schools that I knew best, which was St. Peter's Seminary and Huron University College. I taught on both faculties. We did have occasional courses. I was teaching a couple of them at St. Peter's Seminary on ecumenism and interfaith relations, and on early Jewish texts and the Dead Sea Scrolls. But they were optional courses, so not all the students were taking them. When I was at Huron, we started a course for the first year undergrads, which was about dealing with difference and how Jews, Christians, and Muslims have dealt with the issue of difference over the course of the last 2,000 years, both positively and negatively, bringing us up to where we are today. And a lot of the students said that it was some of the best news that they had ever heard. They knew bits and pieces of the bitter parts of that history and didn't know how much good had happened in the last 50 or 60 years, and they were quite excited to know just how much good news there was between among those traditions today. So I think it's starting, but after 50 years, it's nowhere near as far advanced as you would think it would be. Although there are places in Chicago. One of Sister Lucy's sisters was involved with the Catholic Archdiocese there, and they had a program across the Archdiocese of Chicago where schools there were paired with local Jewish schools, and they had rabbis and priests who went in teams to each other's schools to teach about each other's traditions. And that must have gone on for, would it be 20, 25 years, Lucy?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, I don't have anything further to add. I agree with Murray.
I think our total exposure to the Jewish faith and the Muslim faith was a visit to a synagogue and a mosque. I mean, that was it. And that, I mean, really, that's painful, right? I mean, that just is inadequate. for the kinds of situations in which we find ourselves as clergy or as ordained people. We really need far broader exposure and information, just to demystify, right? And to develop some mutual respect and responsibility, because we have a shared responsibility to be open and generous and accepting, right, of whatever, however God has chosen to define us. So anyway, that was really all I had to say, except that Sister Lucy Murray tried to talk me a few years ago into becoming a volunteer.
Wonderful. You're still welcome. We take volunteers from all over the world in Jerusalem at our center. So here we are, a whole group, and we've had the pleasure of having, not as a volunteer, but as a professor and a resident at our center in Jerusalem, Dr. Eileen Schuler, a number of times.
Yeah.
And if you decide, any of you, to come as a volunteer, just give me a phone call.
Well, it's still on the order paper. It just hasn't risen to the top yet.
And I think you highlight something, Nancy, that, you know, sadly, some of the best opportunities for interfaith dialogue in the last 25 years have come about because of tragedy.
Yes.
Think about after 9/11, all the mosques that had open houses, and people streamed into the mosques to learn about Islam. And it did a lot of good, and it dispelled a lot of prejudice and a lot of stereotypes and misunderstanding. After the attack at Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, there were a lot of synagogues who held open houses. And so out of one of my colleagues in Israel that some of you will know, Rabbi David Rosen, often says, out of the bitter comes the sweet. Sometimes out of those terrible, terrible tragedies and those moments of destruction and hate, they have actually brought our communities together in conversation in ways that might not have happened otherwise. So somehow in all of that, God is working in very mysterious ways to help us get to know each other better and respect each other more.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and we thank you.
Oh, I wanted to thank both of you, Mari and Sister Lucy, for being with us this evening, to have an opportunity to share and learn from you. I think that many of the people who are here didn't realize what the Sisters of Zion is, and their really life's work in terms of working on that relationship between Christians and Jews, and not only between Christians and Jews, but also bringing an understanding of Judaism to others who never would have learned about Judaism. And as I said before, there's so much that we have to learn and do. I'm, you know, a little bit saddened, as I think all of us are, about the crisis of the pandemic and the opportunities that we don't have. Every year it would have several high school groups that would come, or other groups that would come to the synagogue. Now it's you know, an issue to try and get Jews to come to the synagogue, given, and I know it's a challenge for you, Sister Lucy, to get Christians to come to church. So I hope that we will have the opportunity beyond the screen to learn and deepen our relationship with each other in significant ways. So again, on behalf of all of us and on behalf of myself personally, I want to thank both of you for spending some of your time, some of your precious time with us to share. And I hope that if anybody would like to, if I can volunteer you, Murray and Sister Lucy, if anybody would like to speak more with Sister Lucy or with Murray, I know that given the type of people that they are, they would be more than willing to talk with any of you if you ever have any questions or would like to dialogue further with them. So.
And thank you to all of you. Thank you to Adath Israel, and thank you, Rabbi Seed, for the invitation tonight. This was just joy to be able to be part of, and hopefully this is only part of an ongoing conversation that will continue in the months and years ahead.
Yes, I hope so.
Yes, thank you very much, Rabbi. It was a great privilege and a joy to be with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody has a good holiday tomorrow. sleep late, relax, and just everybody should be well and be safe.